Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about mini comics, and more specifically, how I made my mini comic, The Adventures of Basil and Paulo. It was a bit of a journey, but I'm going to take you through the creative process, starting with formulating an idea, then planning it, then creating it, and finally, production, which is not my favorite, but it has to be done to get from an idea in my brain to this finished mini comic. So, let's hop into it. So step one of the creative process is formulating an idea. This is something that most of us know. You can't really do anything or create anything if you don't have an idea to work off of. So where I got my idea from was from a dream. I had a dream and I kind of liked the story, so I wrote it down. But you can get your ideas from anywhere. You can be inspired by other people's work, by nature, by experiences in your daily life, or needs that you have, and you're like, hey, this kind of sucks that this thing doesn't exist, let's make it exist. These are all ways that you can get your ideas, but I got mine from a dream, and I'm just gonna run it by real quick so that you kind of understand where I was coming from. I did end up changing it pretty heavily in the end because it was a dream and it didn't really have the best plot or the best layout for a comic, but basically this kid is born blind but really strong. His name's Paulo, and he makes friends with this weak but smart kid, Basil, and they grow up together and they go around and they foil the plans of these local bandits over and over again because Basil's very smart and Paulo's very strong, and together they're a pretty good team. But the bandits, they don't like this, and they're trying to figure out a way to get rid of them, but they realize we're not going to be able to get rid of Paulo because he's this big strong guy, but we can pretty easily get rid of Basil. He's just this little beanpole. So they devise a plan. They go visit a wizard who changes one of the bandits' voices to be Basil's, and then they kidnap Basil, and then the imposter bandit switches places with him, so that this guy who sounds like Basil is telling Paulo things to do, and Paulo's like, hey, it's my friend Basil, it's all good. But then this Basil starts telling Paulo to like go raid villages and stuff, and Paulo's like, Basil wouldn't tell me to do that. So he starts questioning things. Meanwhile, Basil breaks out of where he was captured, and he runs to find his friend Paulo to see what they did to him. And in this intense exchange where Basil shows up and the imposter Basil is there and Paulo's there and they're all talking and it's crazy, then eventually Basil and Paulo reunite and they take out the bandits. That was basically all I got from my dream, and it was a pretty cool idea, but at the end of the day, something that complicated would be hard to illustrate in a comic, especially one only 5 pages long, which is what I was going for. So I ran this story idea by some of my friends and family, and we simplified it down, but that's all in the planning stage, because right now, this was just the idea that I had, and I had this story idea, I had some characters, and with all this in mind, I was ready to head over to my sketchbook and start planning. Alright, so we talked about getting your idea, and that's really important because if you don't have an idea, you don't have anything to work off of. But what's almost more important than having an idea is planning, because if you don't plan that idea and you don't flesh it out, then you're not going to have anything to work off of when you want to get into creating your project, or in my case, my comic. So I did my planning in this sketchbook here and started off just writing out the story, what we had talked about in the idea portion. As you can see, I made some big edits here because I wrote this originally just based off the dream. Then I talked it over as we discussed that you should do. And so we changed the wizard, changing the bad guy's voice to Basil's into the two friends being separated, so they have to use their own strengths. And we have the bandits trying to break into the food storage. We added the part about all the food. That's the reason that the bandits are coming to the villages, and how Basil and Paulo saved the day. So that was the writing portion, like laying out the plot, but here's something that I had never done before. This was laying out the pages for a comic, because I'd never actually tried to write a comic before. So this is just really general, like blocking in big colors if you're doing a painting. This is just page layouts and what I want the pages to explain. So here we have first page, setting the scene, this fantasy Africa village, and how they become friends, and at the end of the first page, it sets the scene for the next page, which is the rising action. We got the bad guys coming to town, they steal the food, and Basil and Paulo at the end of the second page decide that they're going to do something. And here I was working on one idea of how they're going to get the food back, but as you can see, that didn't work, and I said see other page. So here is the other page, and this is Basil and Paulo waiting to get the food. They're in hiding, and then this is how they get the food back. So they get the food back in that page, but then the bandits find out who stole the food because it was the guys who stopped them on the road, and they go and kidnap them and they lock them up. And I wasn't happy with how this page was turning out, so I redid it right here. So this is how this is like a side-by-side of them breaking out. But once they break out, we get here and the bandits are stuck in the mud and, oh no, what are they gonna do? And then they go down the hill and Basil and Paulo are there and they save the day. But this was the 5th page, and I was originally planning only to do 5 pages, but I realized, no, that's not gonna work. So I ended up adding a 6th page. And as you can see, all these footnotes ends in sunrise because it's nighttime, so you want it to end light, like as victory. How they save the day, they remove the wheel pins, the brake straps, and it falls and slides down the hill. And I'll explain that more later. Here's some character designs, and I wanted to iron out what these guys are going to look like. I probably should have done more, because in the final, the character consistency, it's there, but it could be a little more prevalent. And here is the 6th page that I added, and they're standing in the village, and Basil and Paulo, and they win. Here's a little side project in the middle. And now we're getting into a more final planning, because you want to do multiple drafts of your planning just to make sure you know what you're doing before you head into a final product. So here we have Paulo and Basil, and it's introducing their characters and the village and their childhoods, how they were both bullied. It's kind of sad, but that bullying brought them together, and so they have each other's backs and they grow up. Enter the bandits, and the bandits come to town and they steal the food, and no one wants to stand up to the bandits. So then Basil and Paulo are like, well, I guess we got to. So then they follow the bandits here, and then we got the bandit cart coming in with the horses, and there's Basil and Paulo they have sacks full of rocks. That's what this little montage is here, trying to figure out how they can get the food back, and they're not like aggressive teams, so how are they going to do it? By being smart. So they take some bags, fill them with rocks, and then they switch them out in this convoluted montage here through dialogue, because remember, Paulo's blind. So Basil's got to give him verbal cues, and then they skedaddle. That night, they get kidnapped, they get put in jail, they have to break out using their individual strengths. They break out, they follow the tracks in the mud, because they're like, how are we going to track them? Oh, there's tracks in the mud. So they follow the tracks in the mud to the stuck wagon on the other side of the village, and it's trying to get up a hill, got stuck. And so then they're like, we need to go find a lever. So they all split up, go find a lever. Basil and Paulo sneak in. Paulo frees the horses. Basil takes the pins out of the wheels. And they were skedaddle. And then you got your bandits. They hop back in, but then the wheels fall off because the pins have been removed. And then the final page, we have the bandits sliding into town. Basil and Paulo riding on the bandits' own horses victoriously with the food. And the villagers celebrate, but instead of getting punished, well, the bandits do get punished, but their punishment is they have to make a community garden for the village to grow food for years to come, as they stole food. So that is my planning, and then I took pictures of all these more polished sheets and I threw them on my iPad in Procreate, and that is what I used to make my final pages. So we'll move on to creation next. So creation is probably the part of your project that is going to take the longest, and you should go into creating whatever it is you're making with that mentality. I did go into creating this comic with that mentality, but I didn't quite realize just how long it would take. So this first page ended up being the cover page of the comic, but right as I was drawing it, I was just trying to figure out kind of what the color scheme for the comic would be, what the characters would look like, as this was the first page that I'd drawn them in like a finished illustration. As you can see, the bandits are lurking there. And preparing for this project, I did watch quite a few videos. I watched a couple on like how to make a little comic, a couple on how to format like short story comics. I can link them in the description, and they were really helpful. I should have definitely listened to how to make mini comics a little bit more, as when we get to formatting, you'll see that it's a bit of a nightmare. But this time lapse is sped up quite a lot, and I cut away some bits, yet it's still pretty long, as you can see, and this was just the beginning. I did not realize how long it took to make comics. Unfortunately, the time lapses for Procreate, they didn't flip, so you're stuck watching it sideways. But basically, I took that image, you can see it very lightly in the background. I took the image from my sketchbook, did some line work over it, and then I redid the line work on this one, polished it up a little bit more, and then I went in with the colors. This is hyper sped up, even more so than the last time lapse, so that we can fit all 6 pages in. This is the next page. So you can see here, I'm sticking really close to my concept pages, and that's because I ran through 2 iterations in the sketchbook, and I had written in all the dialogue already, and I read through that mini version of my comic in my sketchbook multiple times, and it worked. So I was like, I'm just gonna stick with it. So I did change a little bit of things here and there, but overall, the layouts of the pages and the drawing compositions stayed almost identical to how they looked in the sketchbook. They're just obviously more detailed in the final product. And this just goes to show how important planning is. If I hadn't have done these planning sketches in the sketchbook, I would have had to do way more work when I was working on the finished illustrations. But since I had that skeleton already laid out on those pages, all I had to do was beef it up a little bit. One thing that was also a challenge while doing the nighttime scenes was the lighting. I ended up just throwing a multiply layer of a darker color over those panels, and I think it worked, but that was a bit tricky. One thing that was really good about this project is it helped me work on my facial expressions, because these people are talking and they're feeling emotions, and you have to convey that to the facial expressions. And I definitely didn't nail it in all my panels, I will be honest and say that much, but I was pretty happy with some of them. And another thing that it gave me a very huge amount of respect for comic artists and people who make graphic novels. This project probably took me around 50 hours, and that's just making it, that's not producing it. We'll get to that next, but that is a long time, and it's only 6 pages long, and they're not even the most stellar pages. I'm pretty happy with them, but they're not like top tier graphic novel level. And yet there's people making entire books that are just full of like fantastically beautiful illustrations. So that's the goal. But that's another thing, this is something I got from Jake Parker's videos, and it's, you gotta limit yourself. If I had gone into this project saying, oh yeah, I'm gonna write like a 10 chapter graphic novel and it's gonna rock the world, I wouldn't have finished. I barely finished this project. I actually started this project in March, worked on it for 2 weeks, and then I only got back to it like a month ago, and then I powered through and finished it because I made it actually an assignment for school. So if I hadn't have done that, I don't know if I would have finished it, because it's actually very difficult to do a graphic novel. But I did eventually finish coloring and putting all the text on all the pages, and here they are. And then it was time to format, print off, and get ready to have a physical item in my hands. So now we head on to production, which is very easily my least favorite part of any project that I do, because it requires formatting and planning and nitpicky stuff that I'm just not very good at, because when it comes down to it, I'm not a very patient person. But the main thorn in my side during this whole printing ordeal was the fact that me in the past made all of the comic pages different sizes. Now, this is something that I realized much too late on in the process to fix, and at the end of the day, it's a good learning experience, because the final product does suffer from it, and it is a mistake that I will definitely not make again. But in production, it's important to get your product looking its best, and I did everything in my power to do that. I have a printer at my dad's work that I could use, and you can see in the video here that he helped me out quite a bit, which I was quite thankful for. And I did some test prints. I did quite a few test prints, some ones in black and white so that I saved ink, tried a couple different papers, saw see which ones worked best. I printed off 2 different versions. One's on a thicker paper. You can hear it here. You can hear that wibble wobble factor, if you will. And then we got this thinner paper right here. And the thicker paper, it came out kind of cloudy, almost like a vintagey print, which I do like the effect of, but since it's thicker, the fold in the spine made it so that the pages were slightly too short, whereas the thin paper has a tiny fold and all the lengths work out. The thing about a project, this is something I'm taking from Jake Parker. The thing about making a product out of your project is that at the end, you have something tangible to hold. And as soon as this comic came out of the printer, I was stoked. I was very excited. There was a significant amount of screaming. You can't hear it in the videos. They were happy screams, I'll have you know. Because I was holding something that I had seen on the screen for over 50 hours, and I worked on every little detail, and now it's in the real world, and I'm holding it, and I can read it, and other people can read it, and it's just really fun. And that's, at the end of the day, why we create stuff. It's to have things and to show them to your friends and be like, hey, this is something I made. And it's to inspire others, because honestly, this was hard, but it wasn't that hard. Anyone could do it. Even if you don't have an iPad or something to do digitally, you can do things traditionally, scan them in and format them. It just comes down to being willing to try new things and put the work in. So I learned a lot during this process. I hope you learned something watching this video. And now we will head to an outro. Well, if you made it this far in the video, it is now the end. Congratulations! I know it was a little long, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to support my work, you can head over to my Etsy store. The link is in the description. I got some groovy stickers, some keychains, some pins, and this comic will probably be up within the next week, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you apply this creative process in your life. Let me know what you make if you make a mini comic. I've also linked a bunch of videos that I found helpful during this process. You can go check them out. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.